Hello, and welcome everybody to the National Trends in Disability Employment,
or nTIDE,
Lunch and Learn series.
Just a few housekeeping items before we begin.
This webinar is being recorded.
We will post an archive of each webinar each month on our website at www.researchondisability.org/nTIDE.
This site will also provide copies of the presentations, the speakers' bios, full transcripts, and other valuable resources.
As an attendee of this webinar, you are a viewer.
To ask questions of the speakers, click on the Q&A box on your webinar screen and type your questions into the box.
Speakers will review these questions and provide answers during the last section of the webinar.
Some questions may be answered directly in the Q&A box.
If you have any questions following this recording, please contact us at disability.statistics@unh.edu
or toll free at 866-538-9521 for more information.
Thanks for joining us.
Enjoy today's webinar.
Hi everybody, this is Andrew Houghtonville from the University of New Hampshire. I'm here to welcome you to nTIDE. So the nTIDE Lunch and Learn is a joint effort with the University of New Hampshire, Kessler Foundation, and the Association of University Centers on Disability, AUCD. So this occurs every noontime on the first Friday of each month in coinciding with the release of the nTIDE report. This effort is funded in part by the Rehabilitation Research and Training Center on Employment Policy and Measurement, which is funded by the National Institute on Disability Independent Living and Rehabilitation Research, otherwise known as NIDLR. We will have three parts. We'll hear about the numbers, the actual nTIDE report itself, which was released this morning. Elaine and I will present some of the numbers. We'll then go to part two, which is nTIDE News, which is Denise Rizal from AUCD. And then we have a guest speaker for the third part, Adria DeSimone, who will talk about spinal cord injury program at Kessler Institute for Rehabilitation, which is a partner, sister, relative organization to the Kessler Foundation. And then in part four at the end, we'll do Q&A. So if you have questions about the numbers or the news, you'll have to wait until after Adria finishes her presentation. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Elaine to start the nTIDE report section of today's webcast.
Thank you, Andrew. Next slide, please. So this monthly nTIDE report is a press release and infographic that looks at the employment numbers issued by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics through a disability lens, reporting on the job and employment situation on the first Friday of each month, which is known as Jobs Friday. Next slide, please. The nTIDE report is compiled from data which is issued by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics Current Population Survey, which is known as the CPS. It's the official source of the unemployment rate that's used in the news. Our statistics include civilians ages 16 to 64 not living in institutions. This information has been available on the CPS since 2008. That's the year 6 disability questions were added to many of the federal surveys. Since our data is not statistically adjusted, we compare the data to the same month as last year, so it's a month-to-month comparison. Thank you, Andrew. Back to you.
All right. Thank you. So the numbers. So kind of mixed, a little bit of, not really mixed news, but kind of a tapering off, so to speak. So the October 2018, the employment to population ratio, which is the percentage of people in the population who are employed, 31.4% for people with disabilities. It went down slightly this past year. In October 2019, it was 30.7. So that's a little bit less than a percentage point decline. For people without disabilities, it actually went up by a little bit more than little bit less than a percentage point, 74.3 to 75.1. A related statistic is the labor force participation rate. So this is not only the percentage of people in the population that are working, but also actively looking for work. So the percentages are always going to be a little bit higher because you're adding in the people who are actively looking for work. And so similar to the employment to population ratio, it went down for people with disabilities, but up a little bit for people without disabilities. So it went from 34.2% to 33.3%. So almost a percentage point decline for people with disabilities. For people without disabilities, it went up by a little bit less than a percentage point, from 76.9% to 77.6%. When we look at the time trend, so this is again going back to the employment to population ratio. We see, as Elaine mentioned, it first started being collected in 2008. That's right around the Great Recession. The big job loss months for the Great Recession were February 2008 and August 2008. And you can kind of see these declines going down. And then for people with disabilities, it continued to decline for a while and then started picking up around 2014. And we saw an increase from 2016 to 2008. And now if you look at the last few months, we're almost on 2 years now where there's been this kind of tapering off. If we look at the time trend, you can see, the swoop for people without disabilities, a slow progression upward. And if you look at people without disabilities, they're now above where they were when this series first started. The people without disabilities see the decline for the Great Recession, kind of a real low point. It declines for quite a while. And then we actually see the increase in 2016, 17, 18, but then tapering off since, you could say that it's actually around October 2017, you can actually say maybe that's when it started to taper off. And so, this is not the news we were hoping for. And hopefully in the course of 2020, you will see an increase. Now, one of the reasons why I think it's hard to say definitively is that the rise in the employment to population ratio for 2016, 17, and into 18 really coincides with full employment. So when the unemployment rate goes below around 4 percentage points, around 4% for the overall economy. As the economy reached full employment, people with disabilities were potentially encouraged to jump back into the labor market, jump back into employment. You start seeing help wanted jobs all around you, maybe very locally, so that transportation doesn't become an issue, becomes less of an issue. And so perhaps as the economy kind of remains in full employment, perhaps the people with disabilities who it's easier to go back to work are already back to work, and people who are facing greater barriers are still kind of on the sidelines of the economy. So that's my take on it. I'd be happy to answer some questions. Again, it's really hard to say exactly what's going on, what's the causal relationship in these things, but certainly the full employment period is an important indicator that could be influencing these trends. So now I'm going to turn it over to Denise. Denise, for the news.
Hi, everybody. So you know that usually we start out with a federal policy update, and I'm going to do that again today, but I'm also going to give you another kind of Congress's new reality. So first thing, we always check on appropriations because we aren't done. And the appropriations for the year that started October 1st still have not been passed. We are under a continuing resolution that runs until the 21st of November. At that point, the government will either shut down, or Congress will have to pass appropriations, or they will have to do another continuing resolution. I think the answer probably is they're going to do another continuing resolution. As you probably have noticed, there's lots going on in Washington these days, and I'm not sure that the Democrats and Republicans are going to be able to agree on money. But we'll see. As of right now, though, the continuing resolution goes through the 21st. It is flat funding. That's what means. It's based on flat funding from last year. We just continue on from what the appropriation was from last year. The reason this says Congress's new reality is because I think one of the things that we need to understand going forward is that, as I said, there's a lot going on in Washington right now. Not only are the whole impeachment conversations going on, and there's a campaign going on for president, which will obviously end, and for all kinds of other offices, which obviously won't end until next November. When I talked to Rylan Rogers, our Director of Public Policy here, what she said to me was, Denise, I think this is Congress's new reality. We are not going to be getting things done. We may get nothing done here in Washington between now and next November. So I think people should be prepared for that. It's possible some things slip through, but I think we should be prepared because there are a lot of bills out there that folks we've been working on, that I know you have been working on. The Higher Education Act reauthorization hasn't been finished. There's a number of bills around employment to get rid of some minimum wage, or to change some, move away from, or totally get rid of, or whatever the bills are. There are a number of bills out there around employment, and we continue to work on those, and you should continue to work on those. But I think we all need to understand that it's going to be tough to get anything passed between now and next November. That's just the reality right now. One other thing I wanted to bring up, just as a kind of a national piece, the Supreme Court denied cert, which means they said they would not hear a case on website accessibilities having to do with Domino's Pizza. The lower court, the case had to do with a man who was blind in California who sued because he couldn't order a pizza on his cell phone because the app from Domino's didn't work with his screen reader. Domino's was claiming that because there were other ways he could order a pizza, he could go in, he could call on the phone, he could do other things, that they didn't need to make their app accessible. The lower court said, yes, you do. You have to have online services, online services and websites have to be accessible. And the Supreme Court declined to hear it, which means they did not overturn it. So the lower court ruling stands. It's an important ruling for accessibility of websites and online ordering and other online services. I think the reason I raise it here is because as you can probably imagine, I think there are a lot of ramifications for employment for people with disabilities who use these types of services. So I think this is going to be, we'll see how it plays out. I can't believe the ADA anniversary is 30 years. 30 years will be next July. I can't believe we're 30 years out and still having this conversation, but we are, and this is a really good decision. So I wanted to make sure you saw it. Next slide.
That's a really neat decision.
It is. It's important.
Because especially with the technologies they develop for their customers is probably going to feed back over to workplace applications.
Exactly. So this is a big deal. There have been some other cases kind of in this line, but this one's a big one. Okay, next one. I want to make sure you saw, this is a webinar that is on being done by NDI and Michael Morris, who was our speaker last month. It's on opportunities for banks to better serve people with disabilities. Michael talked about that on our nTIDE last month, and is a webinar on mining FDIC data. So as he talked about, people with disabilities disproportionately low and moderate income and 3 times as likely to be unbanked. So NDI has looked at an analysis of FDIC data, the survey of unbanked and underbanked households. That's where they got their data. They're going to kind of dive into that data and then talk a little bit about opportunities for banks to better address the needs. Since Michael's presentation last month was so popular on the nTIDE, and I agree, it was a fabulous presentation. I wanted to make sure you knew about this so you could also listen into this one if you're interested. Next slide, Andrew. Another one that popped up, there's a couple of things around AT this month, and I just want to make sure you saw them. This one is kind of just a basic, how AT programs can help you. This is another one I talk to you a lot about. I print something out or I stick it in a folder on my computer so I know I have some basic information if I ever need it. This is another one like that. It's really short and very direct and easy to understand about what is the AT What are AT programs? What kinds of programs and services do they offer? How can they help? Some good references, references back to ABLE data and the AT3 Center. So this is a kind of just a basic one that I found really useful, and it's new. So that's the other thing. So sometimes you have these kinds of things, they're dated 3, 5, 10 years ago. Well, this one's a new one, so that's good. Next one, Andrew. Another one on AT. This is a data brief that is out of the Center for Center for Assistive Technology Act Data Assistance. And it also looks at the ATF programs across the US, what they're doing, the numbers around device demonstrations and loans and reuse programs, state financing, the data about how many programs are doing what. Then what I also liked about it, and makes it a really nice, and it's nicely packaged too. We talk about figuring out ways to put data into packaging that can then be used for policy or for influence or for education or whatever. This is a really nice one because it also has stories. So, it gives you a story when it talks about device demonstrations. This many states do it, this many devices have been loaned out, all of those things. And then it gives you a story, a little quick snippet about somebody who used it and how it benefited them. So again, I'm a policy geek. From a policy point of view, this is a really nice one to use with policymakers when you're talking about AT Act, which also has not been reauthorized yet. Okay, next slide, Andrew. This is one out of, I talk about, we try to highlight the things that come out of Department of Labor, out of EARN and PEAT and a number of their projects that are funded through DOL. This one is from EARN and the National Disability Mentoring Coalition on a workplace mentoring playbook. And again, this one is not necessarily, I thought this was really well done. If you're implementing mentoring programs, how you include those as part of your overall disability inclusion strategy. So it's got tips, tools, some basic stuff, but a really good one for employers, I thought. Another one that's good to share. And I commend this one to you too. Go look at it. It's well done, and EARN, as usual, has done a very good job on this one. Next slide. NCSL. So National Conference of State Legislatures is NCSL. I suddenly realized I didn't put that on here. Not everybody would know what that is. NCSL is the organization of literally state legislators join this organization. They look at all kinds of different issues. They have not done a ton of disability stuff in the past, but every once in a while you get something. This one is on juvenile justice and TBI. So it was very specific, and I thought that was interesting. Certainly we all know the percentages of people with disabilities and kids with disabilities in juvenile justice. It is specifically highlighted to policy work in 4 states, Colorado, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, and Virginia, and identifying and supporting youth with TBI in the justice system. It was supported by an ACL grant, the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators. There's a toolkit and stuff to go with it. And just the fact that it's up on the NCSL website for all state legislators across the country to look at, I thought was really interesting. Again, if you're a state policy person, highlighting this for your state legislators coming out of NCSL gives it a different kind of stamp. So it's another disability piece that, and we don't often talk, or we don't talk as much about folks with TBI. So I thought this was interesting that this is a focus that they had. Okay, next slide, Andrew. This one is on, and this one's from Bazelon. Actually, our speaker next month is going to be from the Bazelon Center for Mental Health Law, talking about mental health issues in the workplace and a variety of things. But this one is out around jail diversion and mental health services, and basically looks at community mental health services and the essential services to divert people with significant psychiatric disabilities from the criminal justice system. It's kind of a basic, again, what are the services, what do they do, how are they structured, and then the evidence. And I think so often the evidence that's out there about mental health services is wrong. I'm in the public view. The whole connection between guns and mental health, the whole connection between all of those things. Often we don't have the evidence breaking through to say, well, here's the deal. you know, here's the real stuff. Again, let's talk about taking research to policy to practice, back to research. So this was a nice one, and Bazelon always does a really good job, and they're really well respected in the field. So, and I commend them for next month's, I commend you to listen for next month's nTIDE. Okay, next slide, Andrew. This was interesting, the Disability Non-Discrimination Law Advisor. How could I not have known this? This is part of DOL's Employment Laws Assistance for Workers and Small Businesses. And it actually helps, it talks about laws, federal non-discrimination laws, disability non-discrimination laws, and how they apply to businesses. And they actually can individually help employers figure out some of their issues. And it also is good for job applicants and applicants for participants in programs that receive federal financial aid, federal financial assistance of any type. I thought this, again, I didn't know about this one, so I wanted to share it with you. I know about a lot of the stuff going on out there on this, but, and I know where to send people at times, but this was another one where I could send people when I get that question about what do I do, either from the employer or the employee side. You know, I'm being discriminated against, or I think I'm being discriminated against. What do I do? What does that mean? What do the laws say? And this is just a very nice one done by Department of Labor. So there you go. In case you didn't know about it either. Next slide, Andrew. This one, I wanted to highlight. This one is from Deb Rucker, who is part of nTIDE. I don't think Deb's on today, but and she had a new one come out on disparities in community participation. And this one is looking at DOT's National Household Travel Survey. And flip to the next slide, Andrew. That's where the kind of the findings are. And using that to look at community participation. So I thought, again, maybe not a surprise, but this is data that shows it. So, you know, if you have a disability, lower odds of taking a trip, of going out, just in general, for social, shopping, recreational, running errands, going to work, even when controlling for other characteristics, there are lower odds if you have a disability. And then the length of disability, I thought that was interesting too. The length of disability influences that. So I commend this to you. It's, Deb apparently has several things that have come out recently because I ran across something else that I'll tell you about next month. But I wanted to make sure I raised this one because I thought it was an interesting way of coming at community participation by looking at transportation. And certainly transportation is such a huge issue in this field and for people with disabilities. You know, if you can't get there, you can't do all of these other things that you want to do. Everything from employment to running errands. And I would, Andrew, give you, if you have anything else to add about this one, be my guest. And then we go to the next slide too.
I'll just go to the next slide, yeah.
Okay, that's fine. And then this is the last one. This was kind of interesting. Again, you know, it's campaign season, it's election season, whether you have an election coming up in a few days, there are some coming up this November, or whether you're going to next November. This is a course on accessible voting places. It's a 45-minute course. It's free. It's by the Rocky Mountain ADA Regional Center. They do a lot of interesting, actually free training courses if you want to look at them, and I stuck the link for that up there too. But both for election officials and for voters, so that you know what your rights are, you see the overview of the laws, what are some of the common barriers, and then some possible solutions for access. I think the more we can all be prepared on what is accessible voting, what do voting places need to look like, what does the law require, the more we are all aware of that as voters, whether it's voters with disabilities or not, the more that we can make change, the more that we can say, no, this is not right, or you should be doing it this way, or here's an alternative. And then sharing with election officials as well. So I thought this was an interesting one too. I think that's my last one, Andrew. Let's see, flip to the next one. Oh, and the save the date. Thank you, Karen, for putting that in. Coming February 11th, mark your calendars at the Holiday Inn, Washington, either online or in person. This is the release of the Annual Disability Statistics Compendium in 2020. So be sure and mark your calendar. It's only one day this year. And apparently the link for registration is coming soon. Okay, I think I'm introducing, I am. So I get to introduce our guest speaker today. Adria DeSimone is leads the early inpatient spinal cord injury vocational resource facilitation services. Let me say that again. Early inpatient spinal cord injury vocational resource facilitation services at the Kessler Institute for Rehabilitation in West Orange, New Jersey. She's certified as a rehab counselor, community work incentive counselor, and is a licensed associate counselor in the state of New Jersey. And I'm going to toss it to you, Adria.
Thank you, Denise. So yes, thank you for the introduction. So I'm going to talk today about a program that we started here at Kessler Institute for Rehab in West Orange, New Jersey, just over 3 years ago. And it's an early intervention vocational rehabilitation service. And we are applying it to individuals with spinal cord injury. Next slide, please. So just a quick walkthrough of some funding that we received for this project. We received a generous grant from the Craig H. Nielsen Foundation for a Sustainable Impact Project. We have a NIDE grant, and our project is continuing now through a contract with the New Jersey Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. Next slide, please. So some quick walkthrough of our objectives. Today I'm going to describe some research findings related to early employment intervention within medical rehabilitation. I'm going to talk about the vocational resource facilitation model and how it's being applied to the spinal cord injury population here at Kessler, and comprehend some historical trends in vocational rehabilitation and medical rehabilitation that provides the rationale for what we're doing and why we're doing it. Next slide, please.
Did I go to the next slide?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. I'm confused sometimes.
The resource facilitation, it can be defined as a delivery of vocational rehabilitation services that occurs during acute inpatient rehabilitation and continues post-discharge through systematic and ongoing employment service coordination with the goal to obtain competitive employment. So resource facilitation was developed by Malik and colleagues at the Mayo Clinic and applied to individuals with traumatic brain injury. The effectiveness of this model has been demonstrated in multiple studies in which upward of 300 individuals with traumatic brain injury who received resource facilitation services, between 41 and 56% of them reported being involved in competitive employment at 1 year post their discharge. So we've noticed that there are similarities and employment service gaps, which I'll get to on our next slide, between individuals with traumatic brain injury and spinal cord injury. So we've applied and modified a bit this model where we've applied it for the first time to spinal cord injury population. We're calling it vocational resource facilitation, and the vocational at the beginning of the title is to better distinguish this role. We don't want it to be confused with case management, although there's a lot of case management skill set and case coordination involved and critical part of this model and this role. But the whole idea is that the faster that we can connect and link people to medical rehabilitation and community services, the faster that we can engage them in vocational services and reach their goals for employment. Next slide, please. So a walkthrough of some employment service gaps after spinal cord injury. So the National Spinal Cord Injury Model System data tells us as of 2016, there is a 12.6% employment rate for people with traumatic spinal cord injury 1 year post sustaining their injury. And that employment rate only jumps up to 27.6% at 10 years post injury. And this is due for a variety of different reasons. We know that there are increasingly shorter rehabilitation hospital stays where there's nothing vocationally oriented at the inpatient level. The focus is on health and function. There's a greater demand on the state vocational rehab agencies to expand their client base to work with all types of disabilities where spinal cord injury is just a sliver of that greater population. And then there's limited follow-up post-discharge from the hospital on behalf of the person with the spinal cord injury to enroll, engage, and maintain their participation in vocational rehab services. Next slide. So our project goals. So back in the day at Kessler, and I'm sure at other medical rehabilitation facilities, we had a vocational rehab counselor on site at the inpatient level. And this person would meet with patients and talk to them about work. But as the inpatient stays have gotten shorter, this role has slowly been eliminated. So by using this model and applying this model, we are able to reintegrate employment services, hence our picture Back to the Future. The inpatient phase is it's an untapped and overlooked area that we can focus and provide return to work services. Many of the people and the patients coming here are employed at the time of their admission. So it provides a perfect opportunity to intervene early by providing vocational counseling and vocational services and improve the likelihood of this person returning back to work, whether it be same job, same employer, new job, same employer, or a new type of job in general with retraining. So our goal of the project is to infuse the inpatients rehabilitation with vocational resource facilitation. And that continues for a period of 2 years once a person is discharged from the hospital. That's to prevent them from falling through some of the gaps or falling victim to some of those service gaps that I spoke about earlier. We have access to and we integrate employed peer mentor elements throughout the program, both with in-house here at Kessler. We have some peer mentors, but also we use and collaborate with other agencies that allow us to connect. Peer mentors provide a lot of support and insight that I cannot speak to, and they can really act as another source of motivation, but also support for our people with spinal cord injury who are interested in returning back to work. And our goal was to recruit 50 people with spinal cord injury and have 30 of them in competitive employment by December of 2018. Next slide, please. So a quick walkthrough of our eligibility. We are recruiting newly injured people, so if they have to have sustain their injury within 1 year, between the ages of 18 and 64 with traumatic and non-traumatic, non-progressive spinal cord injury. They're being admitted and coming here to Kessler for the rehabilitation. They are intending to live in northern New Jersey after discharge. Right now, we serve just the 11 most northern counties within the state. We do not serve the whole state, just a geographic area. They have to be having interest to pursue competitive employment or some type of education or retraining that will lead them to competitive employment. And they must be able to speak and understand English. Next slide, please. So an overview of the intervention, it's important to stress that my role as the vocational resource facilitator, I am a full-time employee of the hospital. I don't work for an external agency, and I don't come in as an outsider. I'm an employee, meaning that I'm an integrated member of the spinal cord injury department, and I have full access to the inpatient medical and therapy team, but also the outpatient medical therapy team as well. So I'm just going to walk through the project and give an example of what it is I'm doing on a day-to-day. So each week I join the clinical team meetings, and these meetings are comprised of all members of the interdisciplinary team. We have the physiatrist, PT, OT, speech therapist, case manager, nursing, and we're talking about an individual's functional status. We're talking about their barriers to community reintegration, independent living. We're talking about discharge planning and discharge destination. And because by nature the therapy team has the most interaction and face time with patients, they're often the ones hearing initially concerns or questions that our patients might be having about returning to work. So by me being at those weekly meetings, it provides an opportunity for the team to make a direct referral to me for vocational services. Once I'm meeting with a patient regularly, I can then report information back to the team about this individual's employment goal. But I'm really listening and hearing for critical information regarding motor and sensory recovery and how that might impact their long-term goals for employment, what needs they might need from a vocational support standpoint. I'm listening about the durable medical equipment that are being trialed and ordered, and also wheelchairs that are being trialed. What will this person be using as a navigation device, and how that might impact and maybe shift some of the services that they might need. Once I'm meeting with a patient, I meet with them outside of their therapy schedule, and this is when the individual vocational counseling occurs. I'm talking with patients about their goals for employment. If their goal is to return back to their same job with their same employer, we talk about their job at length. We review their essential job functions. And we do this through a variety of different ways, mostly through patient reports, but sometimes patients have access to a job description, which we reference. I also utilize ONET all the time. I love ONET. And even if it's a job that's a little bit difficult for me to understand, I'll go onto ONET, search and try to find a match of their job title, print the summary, and then together they help me and we identify exactly what that person's doing for their job. We're talking about the environmental layout and physical aspects or anything regarding their building type where they are working. And through these conversations, I'm then able to introduce and identify different services that this individual could utilize to support their employment goal. Typically during our conversations, I then introduce them to our New Jersey State Vocational Rehab Agency, which is called the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, DVR for short. If an individual is interested in learning to become eligible for DVR services, I'm then in a very unique situation where I can pull together all of the paperwork, help them identify what they need to submit a referral, and then the goal and the hope is to have the DVR counselor meet with our patients at Kessler before their discharge. This could be either in-person meeting or using a HIPAA-compliant video conferencing. By doing this, we're establishing a sense of social glue, and we're developing a network of providers and services and people and planning who this person is already connected to at the earlier phase of their recovery and then can utilize and continue to collaborate with as they progress. We're establishing hope that once they go home from inpatient, that they're not staying home and that they most certainly can engage in pre-injury activities, one of them being employment. And we're talking about work early. So the fact that we're talking about work and employment, long-term employment goals, it makes it an expectation that this person most certainly can and will return to work. So we're kind of shifting the thinking, not just with the patient, but their family and also the medical team. It's not if or can I return to work, it's when you do return to work. So this early intervention component is really helpful to kind of mold what services this person might be needing as they continue to progress through their therapy. Next slide, please. Once an individual is discharged from the hospital, the idea is to not have them stray from the planning or the recommendations that we initially established during the inpatient phase. Individuals are eligible for 2 years of follow-along services, which can be as frequently as we need to, but at least once a month I'm calling or reaching out to our participants and checking in with them, seeing how they're doing, helping to identify what it is that they might need. And it's a person-centered approach. So as a person continues to progress throughout treatment, their goals might shift, their timeline might shift, their ideas for work might shift. So I never have an agenda when I contact or meet with patients. I meet them where they're at, and they, through our continuous conversations and rapport building, they help me, they allow me to help them to navigate and overcome some of the barriers that they're experiencing. I closely coordinate and remain in communication with the DVR counselors. We're always including family throughout the planning process. And essentially, we're just facilitating a smooth transition from the medical to community-based services. Next slide. So a quick overview of our project data. So as I mentioned, our project started back in June of 2016. And I mentioned earlier that our goal was to recruit 50 individuals by December of 2018. So this table that we're looking at here, this is through September of 2019. But just for this point, we enrolled 79 individuals total between that time period of June 2016 to December 2018. So we've over-enrolled. We had 79 and our goal was 50. And it just demonstrates the positive response that the hospital and the medical team and even the therapists have had regarding the need and the benefit of having this type of service. So I'm going to walk us through this table. It was over the course of 39 months that's an error on my part, I apologize. So we've enrolled 95 individuals over the course of 39 months, and 54 of them did not return to work, but 41 of them did, giving us a total 43% return to work rate. We're then most interested in employment status at 1 year post-discharge. So the remaining columns focus on that. So we had 71 individuals who were discharged for 1 year, and 42 did not return to work, 29 did, giving us a 41% return to work rate. We then break that down into our non-traumatic and traumatic groups. For non-traumatic, we had 18 total that were discharged for 1 year. 8 did not return to work, 10 did, giving us a 56% return to work rate. And then finally, we have our traumatic spinal cord injury group. This one's in bold. We're most interested in this because model systems data only collects data for people with traumatic spinal cord injury. So for this group, we had 53%, we had 53 people total who were discharged for 1 year. 34 did not return to work, 19 did, giving us a 36% return to work rate. So you might be thinking that these numbers are low. Next slide, please. You might be thinking that these numbers are low, but when we compare them to 3 different benchmarks, we're able to see that there's truly the impact of the vocational resource facilitation model on employment outcome. So I'm going to walk us through these categories and explain our outcomes thus far. So the darker green, that sage color, that's our outcomes, which is 36. So when we compare it to the category 1, that is, we're controlling for history. So category 1 represents all the model systems employment data across all years. So on average, there's about a 12% return to work rate at 1 year post-injury. When we compare our 36% employment rate, we have a 200% improvement over that benchmark. We then look at category 2, which helps us to control for the economy. We're looking at model systems data, and it's between the time period, the years of 2011 and 2016. This is right as we were coming out of the Great Recession, but also our project had just started in 2016, so we're getting the most recent numbers before our project had been implemented. And there's a 16% employment rate for individuals with traumatic spinal cord injury 1 year post-injury. Ours is 36%, and when we compare those two, we have a 125% improvement over that benchmark. And then finally, category 3, we are controlling for geography locally within northern New Jersey. How are we doing? So we're still looking at the period of 2011 to 2016, and we're looking at the northern New Jersey spinal cord injury model systems data, which has a 21% return to work rate at 1 year post-injury. When we compare our 36% to that, it gives us a 71% improvement over that benchmark. So it shows us that this intervention is definitely working. Next slide, please. So in summary, we know that this model is helpful. I think one thing is that I'm finding as the program continues to develop is the partnership that we've developed with DVR, our state vocational rehab agency. Our collaborative efforts together is we're able to develop and identify standard services that are helpful, that we know are helpful for this population, for people with spinal cord injury. There's a lot of services that exist and that are fantastic, but they don't match for what the needs are of this population. So for an example, we have a lot of individuals who are working with DVR, and the DVR counselors send them for a vocational evaluation. However, from a physical standpoint, they're unable to engage or complete what is being asked of them from the vocational testing standpoint. So it's not just from a community or a society standpoint on how we view and assist people with spinal cord injury. It's now the services that are already available within our VR system. There's a lot of opportunity for us to train or educate or reach out to them in order for us to expand and support involvement of people with spinal cord injury in order to fairly participate in those services. The early intervention services creates hope and expectations for vocational reentry. Starting this conversation early and encouraging and helping people learn and see that it's not that you have to work or you are reliant on benefits. It could be that it's both. Initially, they might need to apply for Social Security benefits, but we can concurrently also pursue work, and I can help you get off of those benefits through benefits counseling. So we're allowing people to see that there are a lot of options for them, and that work is most certainly an option. And then the follow-along services, it's my favorite part about the program. Checking in with people routinely truly allows them to not fall through any of the gaps. Sometimes people say to me, oh, I was discharged home and it's been 3 months and I still haven't gotten my commode for my bathroom. So I can walk down the hall and talk to our equipment coordinator, get the vendor number, and help that person get what they need. So it's the medical and rehabilitation coordination as well, but also when people are ready. Sometimes people aren't ready at the inpatient phase to be referred to DVR. Sometimes they want to be focused on their therapy, which is totally okay. So continuing to check in with them and let them know, okay, you've been focused on your therapy for the last 6 months. You're telling me that you're getting tired and that you miss being at work and you miss the social interaction and you miss your paycheck. When do you want us to start to refer you to DVR? So it's really meeting the person where they're at, helping them get the services that they need, and then seeing them through to employment. And once they have reached employment, continuing to make sure that they're able to retain and maintain that employment. And that's it. Last slide, please. Yeah, so thank you. If you have any questions, please feel free to write in the box, and I'll hand it back over to Andrew.
Okay, great. Thank you. So two things. Let's put the slides. Oh, no, this is, sorry. Oh, no. Hold on. F5. Sorry, everybody. Let's get to the slide. So you can ask questions via the chat function, which is on your Zoom control panel. Geez. Covered a lot of ground today. All right, so you can go to the Q&A box and type in some questions for us. I'm going to read some of the questions that have come. I'm going to read some of the questions that have come in so far. Let's see. So Adria, how early in the process of rehabilitation do you tend to connect with somebody with SCI? Immediately at admissions, after a certain medical status, etc.? Could you describe that?
Sure. It's not immediately at admission. So the benefit of attending the weekly clinical team meetings is that, so we have 5 doctors here who, we have 5 doctors here who work with spinal cord injury, and each day of the week there's a clinical team meeting. And the benefit of me going to these meetings every day of the week is that I'm constantly abreast of new admissions. I have access to our medical documentation system. So in terms of our eligibility criteria, I'm able to go in, research that person, read and review their medical background, confirm that they meet our diagnosis, eligibility, things of that nature. What I'm finding, and this is also the other benefit of being employed through the hospital, is that within the history and physical, there's usually information, well, we're hoping that somebody would write about their employment, and that's not always in there. So just because it's not in there doesn't mean the person's not working. And I've had the opportunity to collaborate with the doctors and ask to reinforce and make sure that information about employment is being entered into the history and physical, just so that I can get a better sense of, was this person working? Have they, or what was their job like initially, so on and so forth. So I can then approach them on my own, but often, many times, people are always at my door, case managers, doctors, therapists, saying, hey, you got to meet with so-and-so. So it's very, very collaborative. So I can meet with them it's always hopeful to get them at the inpatient level. If people do not get to me at the inpatient level, and I don't meet with them until they're as an outpatient, as long as they're still within that 1-year window, then they're able to be enrolled.
Okay, great. There's lots of questions. Some people have said that there are lots of questions, and I certainly have a lot. There's one question that came to my mind as well that came through the chat box around Social Security disability insurance. And so especially if people have pre-work history, is there any sense of, and the term used by Susan online was diversion away from SSI? My guess is that because you're seeing people in the inpatient, or not the inpatient, but the rehab hospital setting, that you're probably getting to them before they receive benefits counseling information.
Sure.
Do you have any measures, or did you find any evidence or collect any evidence about diversion away from SSI, or I'm sorry, SSDI?
So because it's so early, people want to know, how do I apply for SSDI?
Yeah.
If they're working and they're on a short-term leave and then a long-term leave,
Yeah.
sometimes they wait to apply. For example, I've had an individual who most recently, he applied for Social Security, he became eligible, and then 2 months later, he got a job. So we did all of the individual benefits counseling. I was able to show him and explain to him, just because you have SSDI doesn't mean that now you can't work. So I think with that individualized benefits counseling, it was encouraging for him to see, oh, okay, I can do this, and I will make more money once I start working. So it's helpful. People do need it. And if they want to apply for SSDI, I certainly help them, because again, this is a person-centered approach. But allowing them to see that they don't have to be reliant on it forever is probably the diversion that you're speaking of.
Yeah, so whether they earn above SGA
Right.
when they go back to employment, do you have a sense of it with your employment rate or your measure, your return to work, whether they returned above SGA or not?
Yes. In terms of how many of those people?
Yeah, how many of the?
That I don't have.
Yeah.
But majority of the people, and I know this isn't a direct number, are off of benefits.
Or off of benefits, working full time.
Yes.
For high enough wages. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. That's the one thing, kind of conditioning on the fact that they were employed beforehand. Kind of breaking. I mean, you could look at the return to work rate of both, and whether they return to the same employer.
Mm-hmm.
If what's been said, I think in the Canadian literature around injury, not necessarily spinal cord injury, about workplace injury, is that if you can keep them at the same employer, they're much better off and much more likely to succeed, because they have company level information, learning that's not, that you don't learn in school or anywhere else. Do you have a sense of how many people returned to their place of work, the prior place of work?
I do have this written down on a graph somewhere else. Sure. I wish I had this printed. I don't know it off the top of my head, but the categories that we have are same job, same employer, new job, same employer, or totally new work. And I could follow up exactly and make sure that we can get that out to everybody. But the highest percentage from my memory where people were returning to same job, different job, same employer.
Yeah.
It was a slightly higher percentage.
Right. And Susan asked, followed up with, even if you have a few people who decide to return to work and not apply to SSDI, that could have huge national implications. I agree with Susan's statement in the sense that Social Security is really seeking interventions that can just move the needle a little bit, because, like you said, it's kind of a lifetime. You return to your to work, you're not kind of stuck on benefits your whole life and the remainder of your life. And also, you know, it would be interesting to know more about what if they did change occupations or employers, what occupations they moved into. That's one thing Social Security is very interested in doing, because during the adjudication process, they have to get a sense of whether skills are transferable, conditional on a new injury, right? So that's the fifth step in the disability claims process, is can you do any other work?
Right.
And if you have a intervention that opens up a set of occupations for an individual post-injury, that can be really powerful.
Absolutely.
So John O'Neill and I have talked about getting the spinal cord system involved in Social Security related research. We haven't yet really cracked that nut very cogently.
Yeah.
So I guess there wasn't a question in there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, Dr. O'Neill and I had a conversation yesterday, how people that I'm working with, that I recruit into the program, say to me, I just never thought I could work after this.
Yeah.
I didn't think I could work. So
That's right.
So not only am I talking to them about work options that you can work, but their thinking is that just because I think I can't work means I can only rely on these benefits. So we're kind of, it's like two birds with one stone, that we're able to address both of those false beliefs, that you most certainly can work and you most certainly are not confined to your Social Security benefits. And it took this one individual who I'm working with about 9 months to get to the point of saying, okay, I will meet with DVR. And it was a great meeting. We talked a bunch about transferable skills. This person has great experience in customer service. I see so much potential, but it's just it's not just saying, yes, you can and you can. It's much more past doing a quick internet research on what are work incentives. I think the benefit for me is the CRIC certification was so hard to obtain. It's a hard certification. It's so complicated. But it truly expanded my ability to help people overcome those false beliefs. And I didn't realize how powerful individualized benefits counseling is for people, because it really breaks down everything.
Yeah.
Not just their income, but also their health insurance that they might be receiving as well.
Oh, health insurance as well.
Yeah.
So Susan has a few statements. Susan, you guys should talk. You should get a hold of Adria at some point. Before we go, the one question I have, and I'll use my time to ask the question, is you know, when you're in a rehabilitation hospital setting, people are kind of bombarded with all the different clinicians. You know, if they're there for a month, they may see 20 different clinicians, from OT, PT, speech, you know, their medical, all different, and sometimes they'll have, like at Spalding, they'll have photos. They have a laminated sheet in each room of they give you the list of your clinicians and your nurses and weekend staff, and so you actually always have the person's name and photo. I was wondering if you are part of that photo montage, if they have it at Kessler.
No, but I should be.
Right? Because they'll do grand rounds, and you'll be bombarded. So my son was in the hospital at Spalding for a month, and you were just bombarded with people, and you can't remember anybody's name. They'll give you your card, but then you've got 10 cards.
Sure.
And the insurance person will come in, the social worker will come in, speech, OTs, there's hundreds of people that you get exposed to during a given time, and having a photo collage and having you on that photo collage could be really powerful signal that this is part of your therapeutic regime, not just an add-on.
I love that idea. And I think it could also be helpful for the staff and the therapists who are constantly coming in the room. And I do it all the time. I look over on the board, who's your case manager? and
Yeah.
I can just quickly who it is. So wonderful suggestion. I'll definitely make sure I.
Yeah, and as and family members play a pretty big role
Yeah,
sometimes.
absolutely.
You know, they have to keep track of who people are,
Yeah,
and people come running in and out of the
I know.
hospital
Very
room all.
overwhelming. Very overwhelming.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think we're at time. Thank you very much, Adria. Thank you,
Thank you.
Denise. That was a great presentation. Again, the slides will be available online, and feel free to contact us or Adria or get a hold of us if you have any further questions. Thank you all, and goodbye.